Again, thanks for being here, and we're going to spend about 30 minutes together meditating. And I'll offer some guidance throughout that process, and I will, leave some space for silence within that, certainly. And so then I'll bring us out around 11 a.m. or 30 minutes from now if you're in a different time zone. And from there, we'll have, a chance if you need to use the restroom or whatever. That'll be great to do that then. But Emily will also lead us then afterwards in some mindful movement, which is always very lovely. And then I'll give a little talk, and we'll have some space for discussion and conversation and sharing and reflection from the group, whether about the meditation practice or about the talk itself. And yeah, today we'll be focused a lot on ego and the fun of the ego. So it'll be a little part of the meditation, a little part of the talk, and we will certainly converse about it afterwards. But you can go ahead and start finding a comfortable posture for meditation, in seating, standing, lying down, even walking, if that's what you feel moved to do, is perfectly fine. Wherever you are, trying to find this balance of calmness yet alertness, some sense of centeredness, even in the physical sense of not too far forward or too far back. And I like to rock side to side a little bit and front to back. So find that sense of center. You can allow the eyes to gently close if that feels comfortable. Just inviting the spine to be genuinely upright without being too rigid. Maybe taking a few longer, deeper breaths. Inviting a pause between inhale and exhale. Be inviting that exhale to elongate. Just aware that there is a body sitting. There is a body breathing. Just allowing the breath to return to a natural rhythm. Inviting any areas of tension that are being held to release. And softening the muscles of the face. Just allowing the shoulders to drop down in the way. Maybe offering an unclenching in the jaw, the belly, the hands and the feet. Just becoming aware of what it's like to be you in this moment. Maybe beginning with just noticing this body, so aware of this body sitting, maybe noticing sensations of warmth or coolness in the body. Maybe noticing sensations of pressure or tightness. Noticing sensations of tingling or vibrating or pulsing. Aware of sensations of itching or aching, sensations of heaviness, sensations of lightness, sensations of dampness or dryness. You shifting awareness to hearing, what sounds or hearings now, and aware if there's any reaction to the sounds, a liking or a disliking, an aversion or a clinging. Mental story about the sounds being good or bad, like or don't like, and just allow sounds to be sounds. What is the experience of being you in this moment? Hearing or seeing, smelling or tasting? Is it feeling? Is it thinking? And maybe noticing in this moment what is being believed in the mind, what thoughts or stories or ideas are being held as true in this moment. Aware of thinking, just allowing thoughts to be thoughts, just as we allowed sounds to be sounds. And maybe exploring for a moment, we can observe where thoughts arise from. Can we observe the supposed thinker behind these thoughts? Is it possible to predict the next thought? And just abiding in a not knowing, with an openness and a curiosity. Just aware of the experience of being me in this moment. So, am I this experience? Am I the awareness of this experience? Am I this form, this body? Am I these ever changing experiences, these feelings within this body? Am I the thoughts reacting to those feelings? Perceptions, the mental formations? Am I the awareness of it all? Just trusting in this moment, there's nothing to figure out or solve. Just letting go of any sense of trying. Just allowing awareness to hold us in this moment. Allowing each moment to unfold as it already is. And from here, just take a few final deep breaths. And whenever you're ready, gently opening the eyes again. All right. So you can take your time of transitioning out of the meditation practice. And some water if you need it. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the ego. So if anyone here doesn't have an ego, you can feel free to sign off now, and I'll see you whenever. Otherwise, I'm looking forward to sharing a little bit about it, and yeah, hopefully having some interesting conversation at the end. So let's talk a little bit first just about the brain, because the ego is really the output of our brain. So our brain, it is a device that has evolved over millennia with a single goal. That single goal of our brain is survival. Okay? So the brain it's optimized for, it's designed for survival. And here we can say, survival of the genes, because it's really two things the brain is designed for. It is to not die and to have sex. Okay, notice it's not optimized for or selected for happiness. It is to increase our chances of survival. That is the purpose and goal of the brain. We can think of it somewhat as a learning machine. It's a learning machine that uses its power to exert control over our world. And it does this through planning, through worrying, doubting, fearing, reflecting. And it all does this in order to increase the survival odds for me, myself, and I, and my genes. Okay, so the brain, interestingly enough, is not actually even meant to give us an accurate portrayal of reality. It's just meant to give us whatever portrayal is most likely to lead to our survival. And the output of the brain, sort of how we interact with the brain oftentimes, is through the lens of the ego. So what is the ego? The ego, there's some different definitions of it. We're not talking about the Freudian definition, if anyone is familiar with those ideas. We're talking about simply the ego as being our sense of self. Hey, I really like the etymology of the Sanskrit word ego, which is ahamkara. And ahamkara essentially translates directly as I making. Okay, I've also heard Joseph Goldstein talk about the idea of the process of his thoughts just being I becoming. So what does this look like in sort of a moment-to-moment experience? In the moment-to-moment experience, what this looks like is, we see something random like a piece of bread. So we see this piece of bread, and the mind starts to create a story about what this piece of bread means to me. This piece of bread is not just a piece of bread. It is a reminder that I am too skinny or too fat. It is a reminder that, oh, I should eat before I have to do this other thing in my schedule today. Or, oh, I like sourdough bread. I do not like rye bread. Hey, we have all these fun thoughts. So what happens is that we are not actually seeing the bread. We are thinking about seeing the bread and what the bread means to me. And this is how we relate to almost all of our experiences. Okay? Never actually being with what is, but always engaging in some story about what is and what it means to me. So any stimuli can turn into this I becoming, this I making. And again, the bread example seems somewhat harmless. Okay, but generally the ego can be full of, these worries and doubts and plans and reflections and all that, because these are things that help me, myself, and I survive. So what this means, in more practical terms too, is that when I hear a rustle in the woods behind me, I turn my head every time, just in case. What if this time it's a bear coming to kill me? And I do this again and again, and it is always a squirrel. I've yet to ever see it be anything other than a squirrel. Maybe one day it will be a bear, but it's always a squirrel. But I'm designed to be interrupted from my enjoyment, my leisurely, venture outdoors, because my mind is designed for survival more than anything else. Okay, so we are designed, again, this is where negativity bias, where loss aversion comes in. In evolutionary terms, the idea is that you can eat lunch every day, but you can only be lunch once. So the ego is basically the manifestation of this mind, of this brain. So it means that we crave things like being liked by others, because at one point in human history, that was the most essential thing to our survival, is having others think we are useful, attractive, trustworthy, both for our survival and for our passing on of the genes. So we care about these things. We care about things like collecting resources and calories, and we yearn for comfort. And our modern environment stokes the flame of our ego in a way. Again, so we evolved the desire to hoard calories, for example, in a time when the sweetest thing on earth might be a mango. Now we have fun things like ice cream cake. Okay, we, have the idea that we want other people to like us, But that desire evolved during a time where maybe we would know 30 people in our entire lives. There's more than 30 people on this call right now in this moment. Okay, so, and we have things like social media where we can judge ourselves against the whole world. Okay, we evolved for the desire for comfort, where the greatest comfort might be laying down in a nice bed of grass. Okay, but now we have beds made of memory foam, and we can lie there with 10 pillows in a perfectly 72-degree room eating said ice cream cake. Okay, so this idea is referred to as evolutionary mismatch. Is the idea that previously advantageous traits are actually maladaptive in our current environment. Again, we know all these things I'm referring to. You know, the ice cream cakes, the comfy beds, the, you know, being able to control the temperature in our room. We know these don't bring us happiness because if they brought us happiness, then none of you would be here, right? We wouldn't need another route to try and find happiness or peace. So why is that? The reason why that is because the ego is designed by its very nature to be unsatisfied. Okay, it always wants us to be better and our life to be better. Right? And this makes sense. We're not designed to have one delicious meal and be satisfied forever. We're designed to briefly be satisfied and then raise our expectations to crave more and better. Okay, we're not designed to have sex once. We're not designed to be comfortable once. We're designed to raise our level of expectation, have a little satisfaction from these things, but only to crave more. Okay, so we can't, for example, have the feeling of being safe and then just stop worrying about being safe forever. Because survival is not something that's ever settled. We can always protect our survival. We can always be more, be better. Okay? So, and this idea that we need more and better, there's an idea called hedonic adaptation, which is the idea that, if someone is taking drugs to get high, they need more of the same drug to get the same high that they previously had last time. Okay? It's literally hardwired in our brain that we always need more and better. So we can always do things like make more money, be smarter, better looking, impress more people. We can always try and be safer, more comfortable, more satiated. And so the ego basically is demanding satisfaction and always feeling good, when by its very nature, it is designed to never be fully satisfied and to feel bad. Okay, the ego wants perfect control, perfect comfort, perfect certainty in a world that it does not control, it does not have certainty, it does not have perfect comfort. So therefore, we can say the ego has irreconcilable differences with reality. There is a craving for what we don't have and a clinging to what we do have, no matter the conditions. Again, this is the cause of suffering, as pointed out in the Second Noble Truth. Okay? So dukkha, this is what causes suffering. Suffering, unsatisfactoriness. So in Buddhist canon, we describe this somewhat as the suffering coming from clinging to aggregates, and particularly clinging to them as self. So what this means is that we see things like in the five aggregates, the form, our body, we see this as me, myself, and I. Our feelings, we cling to them as me, myself, and I. Our perceptions, our mental formations, even our consciousness, the awareness of it all, we cling to it. Oh, that is me, that is mine. And the Buddha said the five aggregates subject to clinging are suffering. So the ego makes everything which is not self and turns it into self. Again, I described the example with the piece of bread earlier. Again, it's just, stimuli that we see, perceptions, the sensory information coming in, and we have these mental formations about it, and it turns everything that is not self into self. And that is what we cling to harder than anything else. Our sense of self, our separateness, our ego. I'm like this, not like that. I am good, I am bad. These stories are how we try and find security, but they never fully can provide that because the ego is by its design meant to be unsatisfied. So this is all a little bit depressing sounding, I have to say. Um, to say that in some ways we are designed to suffer. Okay, but also if you are familiar with the Four Noble Truths in Buddhism, you know that the first truth is that there is suffering, that there is unsatisfactoriness. So I'm just telling you why there is that suffering, there is unsatisfactoriness. And the beautiful part is, of course, the fourth noble truth, it is outlines a path out of suffering. So there is a way, even though there is something inherent in the design of the brain, the design of the ego, the manifestation of that brain that we interact with on a day-to-day, moment-to-moment basis, that helps us move through the suffering. So, I have, there's a lot of ways of moving through this suffering. I've outlined four general categories of doing so, so I'll go through those now. And so I have somewhat labeled them as steps, but they're not necessarily like you don't have to do step one, then step two, then step three, then step four. But it can be helpful at times. So the first thing I recommend to people is to practice seeing the ego as not who we are. The ego causes suffering as long as we believe it is who we are. Okay, and we can explore this through practices like meditation, different forms of mindful self-inquiry. Again, our meditation today had some almost intellectual sounding questions that, we try and explore in an embodied way. It's somewhat more consistent with, certain Tibetan type of meditations. It's like we're asking these questions of who am I? Am I this body? Am I this thought? Am I this feeling? And so we can see that the ego, the self-referential voice in our head, you know, is not who we are, because if we are the ego, then who is that is aware of the ego? Who is it that is choosing to respond to the ego? And so we can practice changing our relationships to the ego, because typically the ego dictates our life. The ego tells us to jump and we say, how high? So as long as we are trying to do that, we are subjecting ourselves to misery, because the ego will never be satisfied no matter how high we jump. So we have these ways of exploring through practice, and we can have moments in our life outside of meditation as well. And we'll talk a little bit later about what some of those moments can be. But those moments that we're experiencing consciousness outside of the lens of the ego, you've all probably had glimpses or moments where, we're just, in the flow, we're just being, and there is no ego. And we know that we are not the ego because something still exists in that moment when the ego is absent. Okay? There is an experience of being even with the absence of ego, therefore we are not the ego. So this is something you can practice, is just, recognizing, oh, that is not me. I mean, you can literally say that in the mind. Okay? Just know that when the ego arises, you don't have to believe that voice is true or that it is you. Okay, Ram Dass, the teacher, describes the ego as much more like our self-image. It's our social mask. It's the role you are playing. And even the word personality is derived from, I can't remember if it's a Greek or Latin word for mask. And these are, things that we are not truly. They are just an aspect of our experience. So we'll explore a little bit more about that one because it's thematic in the rest of the steps. But step 2 I describe as do not demonize the ego. The ego, despite everything I've said about it, that sounds quite negative. It is not inherently bad. It is there to try to help and protect us. right? That is its goal. It is trying to help. The Zen master Suzuki Roshi once asked, "How much ego do you need?" And he said, "Enough so that you don't walk in front of a bus." So you need at least a little bit. It's helpful. People oftentimes believe that in spiritual practice there's a goal to eradicate the ego. But that's, sort of a misnomer. It is missing the point. The point is not that the ego is evil and needs to be destroyed. The point is that we don't let the ego dictate our life. So the problem is only when we see the ego as who we are and we try and we waste our life trying to satisfy the ego. Okay? I typically find that the more we fight with the ego, the more we actually strengthen it. When we have thoughts like, oh, I'm not good enough, like most people experience in their lifetime forms of imposter syndrome. Feeling like I don't belong here, I'm unqualified, I'm not good enough. And then we get in these egoic arguments in our head, like, oh, I actually am qualified, like I graduated magna cum laude, like I whatever. But the more we actually argue with the ego, the more we strengthen it, in my opinion. So I always say instead of arguing, again, you can just name it simply with awareness of, okay, oh, that's the ego. Or you can name specific voice in the ego, that's negative Nancy, or that is, that's Bob, whatever. Okay, that is fear, that is worry. And this is in mindfulness practice, a very useful type of noting practice that you can do on and off the cushion. So you can both sort of relate to the ego that way, and you can also have some compassion for it, understanding that it is trying to help you, and it is in pain trying to help you. It is causing suffering, and that hurts. But the more we create a positive internal relationship with those voices, with the ego, again, I didn't say when that ego voice pops up, tell it to shut up. That does not help anything. Okay? But if we have healthy internal relationships with the different parts of our experience, just as we'd have a healthy life when we have healthy external relationships, there is the foundation there for some peace, for some being okay with how it is in each moment. Okay, so we do not identify as the ego, and we do not demonize it. We can, through practice, relate to experience through our other senses. Again, the ego is thought powered. Okay, it uses thoughts to make everything a story about self, which is exhausting and leaves us perpetually unsatisfied. So when you feel a feeling in the body, or you see a tree, you hear a fan blowing, okay, there is peace to be had in that experience, because there isn't necessarily a right or wrong with that, a good or bad, even a liking or disliking, a perfect or imperfect. There can be pleasant or unpleasant sensations. Again, that's, feeling tone, Vedana. But there can be an acceptance of just what is. Instead of the mind, the ego is always going to duality. I like this, I don't like that. It is always trying to optimize, to fix, to solve, to change, to manipulate in order to have a greater sense of control. And that creates the irreconcilable difference with reality. But if we can be with the feeling, notice there will be thoughts about the feeling, but then we just come back to what is. There can be peace there, but we live in a world in which we are not connected to our other senses. We live everything through the lens of the ego, because we're always on screens, we're not embodied, we don't have the capacity oftentimes to slow down and pay attention. We are always in this trying to solve, fix mode, this intellectual mode that is prioritized by the society we live in. So again, the problem is not the thoughts themselves even necessarily. The problem is that we don't process the thoughts the same way we process the sound of that fan blowing or an itch on the knee. We take it very personally, and the more personally we take things, the more we empower the ego. So, the more we are connected to the ego, the further from reality we actually are. And in Buddhism, wisdom comes from truly knowing the way things actually are. I mean, Vipassana means clear seeing. That is clearly seeing the way that things are. And when we clearly experience and know the way that things are, that frees us from suffering. And the ego, like I mentioned earlier, does not give us an accurate portrayal of reality. It is a disconnect from reality, meant to help us survive reality. You know, the teacher Ramana Maharshi once said that reality is simply the loss of the ego. So the ego is sort of the barrier oftentimes between us knowing what truly is and what we think is. So, if we can find these ways of slowing down and relating to experiences through other senses, we are getting closer to reality as it is. And the last step here is to find ways of making yourself not the center of the universe. That is to me, one way of describing the cause of our suffering as well. Seeing ourselves as the center of the universe. Again, that is the delusion that keeps us from wisdom. So some very practical notes on how to do this. For me, one great way is be in nature more. Okay? To me, that is the best reminder of who or what we truly are. Nature. Again, if we can do something like farm something, be connected to the food that we eat, that is an amazing way of helping find peace and connection to something larger than ourselves. And this idea of connecting to something larger than ourselves, whether it's nature or cause or a community, against Sangha, can we be generous to something more important than ourselves? Can we put ourselves in position to basically be humble, be part of something instead of focus on just me, myself, and I, but something bigger than ourselves? Again, these are ways of putting the ego as somewhat secondary. Again, we can do this by joining a crowd of people chanting or singing or protesting. Okay, I love chanting for this reason. Sometimes I'll chant things in different languages that I don't even know. And I have a great time because I feel connected to something larger than myself, to a tradition, to the people I'm with, to all the people who have chanted this before me. And there is something humble about it. Even when I walk into, you know, kind of a Buddhist vihara and I bow to the Buddha, that is a way of me humbling the ego. And there's lots of ways, again, to immerse ourselves in experiences like art or movement or dance that bring us into the senses, like I mentioned, but also shows us something more universal. It's a way of relating to consciousness outside the lens of the ego. Right or wrong or good or bad just is. It's just flowing. It's just happening. And so the last piece I'll add here is that commit to putting yourself in positions to love and be loved. Okay, so love is essentially the breaking down of separateness between self and others, which is the opposite of what the ego tries to maintain. Okay, and so we can do this through loving kindness meditations. We can do this through just like me meditations. But also I encourage everyone to challenge themselves to be vulnerable and put ourselves in positions to love and be loving. Okay, this is again, you never want to just say in a talk that, oh, love is the answer to everything, but sometimes it can be close to be. Okay, so I'm gonna wrap up here with just a quote from Albert Einstein, which if you've been to some of my Dharma talks before, I've shared probably before. And I can share it in the chat after because it's a few sentences long. It's a bit dense, but he says that a human being is a spatially and temporally limited piece of the whole, what we call the universe. Experiences himself and his feelings as separate from the rest, an optical illusion of his consciousness. The quest for liberation from this bondage is the only object of true religion. Not nurturing the illusion, but only overcoming it gives us the attainable measure of inner peace. So, I'll recap that slightly because it is dense, but I want to highlight the fact that the quote, it says only. So he basically says that a human is part of something bigger than themselves, what we call the universe. there is an optical illusion of our consciousness, which is that we see ourselves basically as the center of our universe. We see ourselves as separate from everyone and everything else. And he says this optical illusion, only overcoming it can give us an attainable measure of inner peace. And I want to highlight that word again, only. And he's saying only because there is no such thing as peace within this optical illusion of our consciousness that we are separate, that we are more important than everyone else. Again, and in terms of ego, if we think we are more important than everyone else or less important than everyone else, that is the same delusion. So we cannot find peace through this optical illusion, through this egoic sense of separate self, because that in itself is the very cause of our suffering. That sense of separate self is designed to keep us in suffering. So only overcoming this illusion leads us out of suffering. So my request for you, in the form of a Ram Dass quote, is don't spend your life trying to please your little ego.